was furious at my mom for sleeping with my teacher, but then she told me why. I came home early and found my mom in bed with Mr. Lowell, my AP chemistry teacher who's married with 3 kids. I stood frozen in the doorway feeling like I was about to vomit. Her blazer was draped over the lamp and his dress shirt lay inside out on the floor. The smell of his cologne, the same one that made me gag in chemistry class, was now contaminating my mother's bedroom. Mr. Lowell ran past me clutching his pants while his pale chest showed scratch marks, and my mother wrapped herself in a sheet with her face completely drained of color. "Please let me explain," she said with tears streaming down her face as she reached toward me with shaking hands. "How could you?" I screamed and backed into the hallway. "He's my teacher! His wife goes to your book club." My mother sat on the bed and put her head in her hands while her whole body trembled. I had no choice. "Everyone has a choice about who they sleep with," I said as my voice cracked. Mom said, "Mr. Lowell has been selling pills to students at your school." My face dropped. "What?" "Fentanyl, sweetheart, Xanax, Adderall. 3 kids have overdosed this semester alone." I stared at her and tried to process this. "So you decided to have an affair with him? How does that make any sense? Even if he was, why wouldn't you just call the police?" My mother stood on unsteady legs and walked to her closet. She pulled out a box from the top shelf with trembling hands. Inside were photos, recording devices, and documents with FBI letterhead. My blood went cold when I looked at surveillance photos of my chemistry teacher in dark parking lots. "Mr. Lowell isn't just some teacher selling pills on the side," she said while her voice broke. "He's part of a major operation. They're using teachers in 5 districts because no one suspects educators." She sat back down and looked older than I'd ever seen her. "The FBI recruited me 6 months ago because I had access to him through school events. I was just supposed to gather information at PTA meetings, but he wouldn't talk business unless we got closer." Tears were running down her face now. "One of the kids who overdosed died last month. You remember? He was 14 years old. His little sister found his body." I remembered his memorial where his parents sobbed uncontrollably. His little sister had to be carried out of the auditorium while the rest of us wore purple ribbons. "Does Dad know?" I whispered. "No one knows except my handler." She looked destroyed. "Not even your father knows because if anyone knew, the whole operation would collapse." She spread photos across the bed showing Mr. Lowell meeting teachers in parking garages. Text messages using code words were visible alongside a spreadsheet of student names with prices that made me sick. These were kids I knew and sat next to in class. "They target specific students," she said while showing me their notes. "Kids with divorced parents, kids with anxiety about college, and foster kids are all marked. They know exactly who's vulnerable." She pulled out another document while her hands shook worse now. "They're expanding to middle schools and planning to recruit 8th graders as dealers. Your brother's friend Bram is on their list." I felt my stomach drop thinking about Bram, who played video games at our house every weekend. He still wore superhero shirts and collected Pokemon cards. "Look at his file," she said. "Single mom who works nights and they're behind on rent. They know exactly what to offer him. They've been watching him for months and documenting his routine." She showed me more files detailing 5 kids who died from overdoses in 2 years, with all deaths made to look accidental or like suicides. Teachers were discussing doses in group texts, like they were talking about homework assignments. "Mr. Lowell handles the AP students personally," she said. "He offers them study aids for the SATs, then gradually increases the doses. He has 17 honor students hooked right now." She showed me a photo of a girl from last year's graduating class. We were told she killed herself, but she actually overdosed on pills he gave her the night before finals. My mother was sobbing now. I tried keeping distance, but he started getting suspicious. The only way to get close enough was to do this. Now I'm so close to getting them all because he trusts me. He's starting to show me the supplier network. She looked at me with desperate eyes. 3 more weeks and we can arrest them all, including every teacher and every supplier. We can save all these kids. But I need more evidence like names and locations." "I can help," I heard myself saying. She stared at me for a long moment while tears still fell. I said, "I'm his lab assistant. I have access to his computer during prep period. He has a second phone in his desk." My mother's face crumbled completely. She reached into the box and pulled out a tiny recording device, which she handed to me with shaking hands. "Tomorrow, you act completely normal. Can you do that?" I thought about my classmate's little sister finding his body. I thought about Bram being targeted. I thought about the 17 honor students who didn't know they were dying. "By any means necessary," I said. The recording device sat on my nightstand all night while I stared at the ceiling and counted every car that passed our house. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and just held the tiny device in my hand, turning it over and over while thinking about those dead kids. Mom knocked on my door at 6, and when she opened it, her eyes were so puffy and red that she looked like she'd been crying all night too. She asked if I was ready, and I just nodded because my throat felt too tight to talk. Downstairs at breakfast, Dad kept looking between Mom and me while we avoided eye contact and pushed eggs around our plates. Augie was talking about his science project on volcanoes, and how he needed baking soda and vinegar, but nobody was really listening. I forced myself to eat 2 pieces of toast, even though they tasted like cardboard, because I knew I had to act normal at the school. Dad finally asked if everything was okay, and Mom said she just had a headache while I mumbled something about a test. The car ride to the school was completely silent, except for the radio playing some morning talk show that neither of us was listening to. When Mom pulled into the parking lot, she grabbed my hand before I could get out and squeezed it 3 times, which was our old signal from when I was little that meant I love you. I squeezed back 4 times for I love you too, and then grabbed my backpack and walked toward the building without looking back. Walking into Mr. Lowell's classroom made my skin crawl because everything looked exactly the same as yesterday. But now I knew what he really was. He sat at his desk grading papers with his red pen just like he'd done every morning for 2 years. Other students filed in talking about homework and weekend plans while I took my usual seat in the third row and tried not to stare at him. When class started, he wrote chemical formulas on the board and explained how certain reactions could be explosive if you mixed the wrong things together. My mind kept going to those 17 kids who didn't know they were slowly dying from the pills he gave them. He made a joke about how chemistry was like cooking, but with more rules, and everyone laughed except me, so I forced my mouth into a smile when he looked my way. During his lecture about molecular bonds, I watched him move around the room and noticed how he paid extra attention to certain students. The ones I now realized were probably his customers. When prep period finally came, he gathered his papers and told me he'd be in the teacher's lounge if I needed anything, then left me alone in the lab. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the hall, then activated the recorder in my pocket and started wiping down the lab benches closest to his desk. The locked drawer where he kept his second phone had a small gap, where the wood had warped, and I could see the edge of a black phone case through it. I organized beakers on the shelf above his desk, and memorized exactly how the phone was positioned, so I'd know if he moved it later. The supply closet door squeaked when I opened it to get more paper towels, and I froze for a second, thinking someone was coming, but the hallway stayed quiet. I was refilling the soap dispensers near his desk when footsteps echoed in the hall and Mr. Lowell walked back in 20 minutes early, catching me right next to his desk. My heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it, but I just held up the bottle of glass cleaner and pointed at the windows I'd been about to clean. He nodded and said something about how I was his most dedicated lab assistant, then sat down at his desk while I moved to the windows, trying to keep my hands from shaking. After school, I walked 2 blocks to the corner where Mom was waiting in her car, and as soon as I got in, she started driving toward downtown without saying anything. Her knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard, and she kept checking the mirrors like someone might be following us. The office building she pulled into looked like every other boring office building downtown, with gray walls and tinted windows. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked down a long hallway to a door that just had a number on it with no company name. Inside was a small conference room with no windows, and a woman in her 40s sitting at the table with a laptop and several folders spread out in front of her. She had sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything, and when she introduced herself as Leah Marshall, her voice was calm but serious like a doctor giving bad news. She explained that the recording device had to be handled carefully for legal reasons, and that everything I recorded would become evidence in federal court. Mom sat next to me with her hand on my shoulder while Leah went through all the rules about chain of custody and what I could and couldn't do with the device. Then Leah opened one of the folders and spread out photos of 5 kids across the table, and I recognized the 14-year-old from the memorial last month. She pointed to each photo and explained how Mr. Lowell had picked them based on their problems at home or anxiety about school. 3 of the kids in the photos were from my grade, and I'd sat next to one of them in English class last year before she supposedly moved away. But now I knew she was actually dead. Leah pushed another folder across the table showing chemical orders from a supply company that Mr. Lowell had been using with fake school purchase orders. The amounts were 10 times what any chemistry class would need, and Mom's face went pale when she saw the totals. We drove home in silence, and I watched Mom grip the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white while she kept checking the mirrors. That evening at dinner, Dad was cutting his steak when he looked up at Mom and asked if everything was okay at work since she'd been so distant lately. Mom and I made eye contact for half a second before she started talking about a stressful project deadline while I pushed food around my plate. The lies came out so easy now, and I hated how natural it felt to sit there nodding along while Dad had no idea what was really happening. After dinner, I went to my room and stared at the recording device on my dresser while thinking about tomorrow. The next morning, I got to the school early and walked into chemistry class where Mr. Lowell was already at his desk grading papers. When the bell rang to end class, he asked me to stay behind to discuss a special opportunity while other students filed out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it as the last student left, and we were alone in the room. He walked over and closed the door, then sat on the edge of his desk, looking at me with this smile that made my skin crawl. He said he wanted to give me more responsibilities as his top lab assistant since I'd been doing such excellent work. I nodded and tried to look excited while he explained that he needed help with inventory management. He handed me a key to the supply room and told me I'd be tracking chemical orders and deliveries from now on. This was exactly the access the FBI needed, and I thanked him with as much fake enthusiasm as I could manage. He watched my face carefully like he was testing me, but I kept smiling and talking about how great this opportunity was for my college applications. During prep period, I used the key to get into the supply room and started photographing the inventory logs with my phone. The orders showed chemicals that had nothing to do with our curriculum, and the amounts made my hands shake. Some of these precursor chemicals could be used to make synthetic drugs, and we had enough to supply a small factory. I documented every page and every receipt while listening for footsteps in the hallway. At lunch, I was organizing beakers when a substitute teacher from Madison High walked into the lab asking for Mr. Lowell. They went to the corner of the room and started talking in low voices, while I pretended to clean equipment nearby. The recorder in my pocket picked up their conversation about test prep materials and student performance enhancers, which I knew were code words. The substitute kept mentioning specific numbers that sounded like prices, and Mr. Lowell was nodding and writing things down in a small notebook. After the substitute left, I went to the bathroom and texted Mom our emergency code, which was just 3 asterisks. She forwarded it to Leah right away, and within an hour, Leah texted back that they'd identified the substitute as another teacher under investigation for dealing. That night, Bram came over to play video games with my brother Augie, and I watched them from the kitchen doorway. Bram was laughing at something stupid Augie said and arguing about which superhero would win in a fight. He looked so normal sitting there in his Pokemon shirt eating chips, and I kept thinking about how they'd marked him as a target. I sat down next to them and asked Bram how school was going, and he shrugged and said it was fine, except his mom had been stressed about money. Augie told him not to worry about adult stuff, and they went back to their game, but I saw Bram's shoulders tense up. The next morning, Principal Cowan's voice came over the intercom announcing new security measures for the school. She said there would be random bag checks and stricter hall pass policies starting immediately. Kids around me groaned and complained, but I wondered if she knew something, or if this was just bad timing. Mr. Lowell's jaw tightened when he heard the announcement, and I watched him drum his fingers on his desk through the whole class. When a student asked about extra credit, he snapped at her to pay attention to the lesson instead of worrying about grades. After class ended and students left, he pulled out his second phone from the desk drawer and made a call. I stayed behind washing glassware and could hear him talking in a stressed voice about complications and timeline changes. He kept saying they needed to move faster and mentioning something about inventory that needed to be moved before the end of the week. During prep period, I was checking the supply cabinets for the inventory list when my hand hit something weird in the back corner. There was a panel that moved when I pressed it, and behind it was a hidden compartment. Inside were small plastic bags filled with pills of different colors and sizes. My whole body started shaking as I took photos without touching anything, because this was the evidence that could save kids' lives. I counted at least 30 bags and could see labels with initials that probably matched student names. I put everything back exactly how I found it and finished the inventory list with my hands still trembling. My phone buzzed with 3 asterisks from Mom 10 minutes later. I walked to the nurse's office holding my stomach and told her I felt sick. The nurse took my temperature and called Mom, who arrived within 15 minutes looking worried. She signed me out and we drove in silence until we reached the same office building downtown. Leah was already waiting in the conference room with her laptop open and papers spread across the table. She pulled up my photos on the big screen and leaned forward with her eyes getting wider at each image. The hidden compartment photos made her stand up and pace around the room while typing notes on her phone. She explained they needed to document the whole chain from the supplier all the way down to the students getting pills. My photos showed the middle part they'd been missing for months. She assigned Detective Carlos Newman to coordinate with local surveillance teams, who would watch the school more closely now. Newman arrived 20 minutes later carrying a thick folder and shook my hand firmly. He showed us surveillance photos of the substitute teacher meeting with 3 other teachers at different schools. Each meeting happened right before a student overdosed at those schools. The pattern was so clear when you saw it all laid out on the conference table. Mom drove me home that evening, and we ate dinner with Dad and Augie like nothing had happened. The next morning, I walked into chemistry class and Mr. Lowell called me over to his desk immediately. He asked if I was feeling better while studying my face carefully for any signs of lying. I mentioned Mom had been stressed about work lately, and his shoulders relaxed slightly. He even patted my shoulder and said family pressure could be tough on everyone. During class, I watched him walk past a junior who'd been complaining about SAT anxiety all week. His hand brushed the kid's desk, and something small passed between them so smoothly nobody else noticed. I marked the time on my phone and typed the student's name in my notes app. The junior slipped whatever it was into his pocket and kept taking notes like nothing happened. At lunch, I sat near 2 freshmen who were talking about advanced placement exams coming up. One mentioned Mr. Lowell had offered them something to help with studying and focus. The other kid looked uncomfortable and said his parents wouldn't like him taking anything. The first one shrugged and said it was just like vitamins, but better for concentration. I texted both their names to Mom immediately while pretending to scroll through social media. That evening, we were watching TV when Mom's phone rang and she stepped into the kitchen to answer. I could hear her talking to Detective Newman, who was confirming connections between the substitute and 3 overdoses. He mentioned they were tracking financial transactions through gift card purchases at local stores. Mom came back looking tired and said the investigation was getting bigger than anyone expected. Day 5 started with Dad's voice echoing through the house before my alarm even went off. He was holding a hotel receipt and demanding to know why Mom had been at the Marriott last Tuesday. Mom's face went white and she started stammering about a work meeting that ran late. Dad wasn't buying it and kept asking why she didn't just come home if it was work. I grabbed Augie and pulled him to his room while turning up his music loud. My stomach twisted into knots knowing Mom couldn't tell Dad the truth without ruining everything. Their argument lasted another 20 minutes before Dad slammed the front door and left for work early. At the school, Mr. Lowell seemed to be in a great mood and called me to his desk again. He handed me a key to his filing cabinet and asked me to organize his files for parent-teacher conferences. He said I was the only student he trusted with such an important job. I thanked him and promised to be careful with everything, while my heart pounded at this opportunity. During prep period, I opened the filing cabinet and started pulling out folders filled with student information. Each file had weird symbols next to student names that didn't make sense at first. Stars appeared next to kids whose parents were divorced according to the emergency contact forms. Circles marked students who had anxiety disorders listed in their health records. Some files had both symbols plus additional notes written in Mr. Lowell's handwriting. I found Bram's file near the back with both a star and circle plus high potential written in red ink. His mom's work schedule was documented along with notes about their financial situation. There were even observations about which video games he liked and what snacks he bought at lunch. My hands shook as I photographed every page without disturbing the order of the files. Other students on the list included kids I knew were struggling with college applications or family problems. The targeting was so calculated and specific, it made me feel sick to see it all documented. That evening, Mom left after dinner saying she had to meet someone about the investigation. She wouldn't give details except to call them her upstream contact who might have supplier information. Dad barely looked at her when she left, and I stayed home with him and Augie watching a movie. Mom came back 2 hours later looking shaken and immediately called Leah from her bedroom. I could hear her describing a partial license plate she'd gotten from a supplier's vehicle during the meeting. She kept repeating the numbers and letters while Leah apparently ran them through some database. The investigation was moving faster now, but the danger was increasing with every piece of evidence we gathered. Day 6 started with me walking into chemistry class trying to look normal, while the recording device felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my pocket. Mr. Lowell was writing equations on the board and barely glanced at me when I took my seat. During prep period, he left for a department meeting, and I immediately went to his filing cabinet with the key he'd given me. I pulled out more student files and started photographing them with my phone, checking the door every few seconds. The files showed payment records hidden behind attendance sheets with amounts that made my stomach turn. I was so focused on getting clear photos that I didn't hear footsteps in the hallway until they were right outside the door. Mr. Lowell walked in just as I shoved my phone in my pocket and grabbed a stack of papers from his desk. He asked what I was doing, and I held up the papers saying I was organizing them for grading. He watched me for a long moment before nodding and sitting at his desk, while I tried to keep my hands from shaking. That evening, Mom drove me to meet Leah at the same office building downtown. Leah looked at the photos on my phone and her face got serious as she told me I was taking too many risks. She said the evidence was good, but I needed to be more careful because Mr. Lowell was getting suspicious of everyone. She set strict rules about when I could gather evidence and made me promise to never follow anyone or investigate alone. The next morning in chemistry class, a basketball player asked Mr. Lowell about something to help with his game performance. Mr. Lowell started talking about supplements that could improve focus and energy, barely even trying to hide what he meant. Other kids were taking notes about the actual chemistry lesson, but I turned on my recorder and captured every word he said. After class, I stayed behind to organize lab supplies like always. Inside a chemical manual on the shelf, I found a folded spreadsheet showing gift card codes with dollar amounts next to student initials. I recognized at least 10 names from the list Mom had shown me, including 2 kids from my English class. The amounts ranged from $50 to $500 with notes about frequency and dosage that made me sick. During morning announcements, Principal Cowan's voice came over the speakers saying there would be mandatory parent night next week. Every teacher had to prepare presentations about their curriculum, and she expected full attendance from families. Mr. Lowell muttered something about the timing being terrible, and I realized this could give the FBI perfect cover to increase surveillance. That evening at dinner, Augie was excited about something and started telling us about this new academic enrichment program at the school. He said Bram got invited to join, and it met after school with special mentors helping kids with homework and college prep. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth when he mentioned Mr. Lowell was one of the program mentors. I asked casual questions about when it started and who else was involved while Mom's face went pale across the table. After dinner, Mom called Leah immediately, and they talked for an hour about Bram being targeted. Leah came over the next morning with a special phone she'd set up for me to use. She showed me how to forward screenshots and recordings directly to the FBI without creating patterns in my regular phone that anyone could track. She made me practice using it until I could do it without thinking. Day 8 came and Mr. Lowell had another department meeting during prep period. I knew his computer password from watching him type it so many times and logged in while keeping one eye on the door. His calendar had weird meeting invites with coded subject lines, and when I checked the dates, they matched exactly with the overdoses Leah had mentioned. I photographed everything, including emails about supply deliveries, before logging out and wiping down the keyboard. Walking to my next class, I passed the counselor's office and noticed the hall pass log posted on the bulletin board. The same 5 or 6 names appeared over and over for visits to Mr. Lowell during non-class hours. The pattern was so obvious when you knew what to look for that I couldn't believe nobody else had noticed. I took a quick photo and kept walking before anyone saw me standing there. That afternoon, Mom got a call from someone and her face lit up for the first time in days. She called Leah immediately, and I could hear her repeating numbers and letters from a license plate. The partial plate Mom had gotten matched a teacher from Riverside High, who'd been under surveillance for months. Leah said this was the breakthrough they needed to connect the whole network, and she was starting to prepare warrant applications. She warned us that the dangerous phase was coming because once warrants were filed, the dealers might get tipped off and try to destroy evidence or run. Day 9 started with my stomach already in knots before I even got to chemistry class. Mr. Lowell stood by the door when I walked in and asked to check my bag for his missing calculator. My whole body went rigid as he unzipped the main compartment and started pulling out notebooks and folders. The recording device sat in my inner jacket pocket, feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds while he dug through every single pocket of my backpack. He pulled out pens and gum wrappers and old hall passes while other students walked past us into the classroom. My hands stayed steady even though my heart was pounding. So hard I thought he might hear it. He finally handed the bag back and said something about checking the prep room later. During third period, a delivery truck pulled up to the loading dock, and I watched from the window as boxes got unloaded. One box had different tape and sat separate from the others with a shipping label that looked weird. I walked past the loading area during passing period and memorized the tracking number on that box, plus the badge number on the delivery guy's shirt. The custodian was moving the boxes inside, so I helped carry some to look helpful while keeping my phone ready. I managed to get clear photos of the weird box from 3 different angles without anyone noticing. That afternoon, Mom picked me up and drove straight to meet Detective Newman at a coffee shop downtown. He looked at my photos and got excited about the tracking number matching a shell company they'd been watching for months. He told Mom they were building a solid case, but needed just a little more evidence to make sure nothing got thrown out in court. We got home around 6 and found Bram sitting on our front steps with tears running down his face. His mom had lost her job that morning, and their landlord was already talking about eviction if they couldn't pay next month's rent. Augie brought him inside and got him some water while I watched this kid who still collected Pokemon cards sob about maybe having to move in with his aunt in another state. Everything about his situation was exactly what Mr. Lowell looked for in kids to recruit. After Augie took him upstairs to play video games, I followed them and asked Bram if I could talk to him alone for a minute. I told him that if any teachers at the school offered him ways to make quick money or special opportunities, he should talk to me first. He looked confused but wiped his face and promised he would check with me before taking any offers from teachers. The next morning, Mr. Lowell assigned me to watch 5 kids taking a makeup quiz during lunch, which meant I'd have access to the whole lab alone with them. He stood in the doorway watching how I handled giving out the quiz papers and checking that phones were put away. I realized he was testing if I could be trusted with bigger responsibilities and tried to act confident while my hands shook slightly. After he left, I supervised the quiz while also checking the supply closet for anything suspicious. Later that afternoon, we got new lab supplies delivered, and I helped move boxes from the hallway into the storage room. One box felt way too light for its size, and when I shifted it, something inside moved wrong. I set it down carefully and noticed the bottom had a weird seam that didn't match the other boxes. My hands were shaking bad as I took photos from every angle without disturbing the false bottom I could feel underneath. Footsteps came down the hall, so I quickly stacked other boxes on top and grabbed a clipboard to look busy. The janitor walked past without looking at me, and I waited until he was gone to take more pictures. That evening, Leah came to our house with Detective Newman, and they spread out all my photos on the dining room table. They said my evidence was enough to fast-track the warrant requests, and explained that parent night next week would be perfect for coordinated arrests. Newman showed us a map with red dots marking all 5 school districts where teachers would get arrested at the exact same time. They wanted to use the crowds and chaos of parent night as cover, so nobody could warn each other or destroy evidence. After they left, we were eating dinner when Dad pulled something from his pocket and asked what it was for. My spare recorder battery sat in his palm, and I felt my face go hot while trying to think of an excuse. I said it was for a school project about sound waves in physics class while Mom stayed completely quiet across the table. Dad looked between us with this expression that said he knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. The whole room felt like it might explode from the tension, until Augie asked if we could have ice cream and broke the moment. Later, after Dad went to bed, Mom and I sat in the kitchen and talked in whispers. She said if Dad pushed any harder about what was going on, we'd have to tell him everything, but only with Leah there to explain it properly. We couldn't risk him getting protective and doing something crazy like confronting Mr. Lowell at the school, or accidentally saying something that would blow the whole operation. Mom's hands shook as she put the dishes away, and I could see how much lying to Dad was destroying her. I went to bed that night thinking about how parent night was only a week away, and everything would finally be over soon. The next morning, I was walking to first period when screams came from the girls' bathroom and everyone started running toward the noise. A sophomore named Kelly was on the floor shaking while foam came out of her mouth and her friend kept screaming for help. 2 teachers pushed through the crowd and one started CPR while the other called 911, and within minutes, paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. They stuck needles in her arm and put an oxygen mask on her face while the principal made everyone go back to class. But we could still hear the sirens. The whole school went into soft lockdown, which meant nobody could leave their classrooms, and security guards stood at every exit checking IDs. Through the small window in our classroom door, I saw Mr. Lowell standing in the hallway watching the paramedics wheel Kelly past, and his face showed no emotion at all. He just stood there taking notes on his phone like he was documenting what happened for some report. After they took Kelly away, Principal Cowan came on the intercom and said parent night would have extra security this year, including metal detectors and bag checks at all entrances. Teachers started complaining in the hallway about the new rules being too much, but Mr. Lowell looked really upset and kept checking his second phone. He made 3 calls during lunch, and I heard him say something about adjusting the schedule and finding alternative entry points while pacing near the supply closet. That afternoon, Mom picked me up and drove straight to the FBI office where Leah was waiting with a whole team of agents. She said I could help during parent night, but only in a limited way by staying in the chemistry lab and watching for anything unusual. She gave me a wire to wear under my shirt and made me practice talking normally while wearing it so I wouldn't touch it or act weird. She kept saying I was only supposed to observe and report, not engage with anyone suspicious or try to be a hero. On the drive home, Mom's hands shook on the steering wheel, and she said Dad had found more evidence of the affair and was getting really angry about it. When we got home, Dad was waiting in the living room with his arms crossed and his face red with anger. "We need to talk about what's going on," he said, and Mom started crying immediately. She sat on the couch and put her head in her hands while Dad stood there waiting for an answer. "I can't do this anymore," Mom said through her tears. Dad started yelling about trust and marriage vows when the doorbell rang, and Leah walked in without waiting for anyone to answer. She showed Dad her FBI badge and said she needed to explain everything right now before things got worse. Dad's face went from angry to confused as Leah laid out photos and documents on our coffee table showing the whole drug operation. She explained how Mom had been recruited 6 months ago and why she had to get close to Mr. Lowell to gather evidence. Dad sat down hard on the couch and stared at the photos of dead kids while Leah kept talking about suppliers and distribution networks. "You're telling me my wife is sleeping with a drug dealer to save kids?" he asked, and his voice cracked. Leah nodded and showed him more evidence, including recordings Mom had made and texts from Mr. Lowell about expanding to middle schools. Dad looked at Mom, who was still crying, and then at me, and I could see him putting pieces together about my weird behavior lately. She's helping too, isn't she? He asked Leah, who nodded again. Dad stood up and walked to the window and stayed there for a long time before turning around. What do you need me to do? He asked, and Mom started sobbing harder. Leah explained that parent night was in 3 days, and they needed everyone to act normal until then, so the arrest could happen without warning. Dad agreed to play along and even said he'd go to parent night to help maintain cover, which made Mom grab his hand. The next 3 days felt like walking through mud with every hour dragging while we waited for parent night to arrive. Finally, the evening came and the school parking lot filled up with families while FBI agents pretended to be parents walking around with fake kids. I sat up in the chemistry lab organizing displays of student work while watching families stream through the hallways. Mom stayed close to Mr. Lowell playing her role as his girlfriend, and I saw her touch his arm and laugh at something he said, which made my stomach turn. The lab filled up with parents looking at science projects, and Mr. Lowell started his chemistry demonstration mixing chemicals that changed colors. While he worked, he said to another teacher standing nearby, "Titrations at level 3 need adjustment for optimal results." Mom's face stayed calm, but I saw her texting under the demonstration table and knew she was alerting Leah about the code. 20 minutes into the event, a white delivery van pulled up to the loading dock, which was weird since deliveries never came at night. Detective Newman's team followed it with unmarked cars, while Mr. Lowell excused himself saying he needed to check on supplies. 4 agents dressed as parents followed him at a distance while he walked toward the loading dock talking on his second phone. I was cleaning up beakers when Mr. Lowell appeared right behind me near the supply closet, making me jump. "Your mom and you have been very helpful lately," he said, and his voice had this edge to it that made my skin crawl. "I just want to do well in chemistry," I said, trying to sound confused. "Science fair is coming up and I really want to win." He stared at me for a long moment before Mom appeared, asking about the demonstration and whether he needed help cleaning up. She touched my shoulder briefly while asking Mr. Lowell about the next parent presentation, and I felt her squeeze gently to let me know she was there. Mr. Lowell walked away with her, and I watched them head toward the auditorium where more parents were gathering for the principal's speech. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard shouting from the parking garage and saw police lights flashing through the windows. FBI agents and cops flooded into the building while parents grabbed their kids and teachers tried to figure out what was happening. Through the lab window, I watched Mr. Lowell get tackled to the ground in the parking garage while 12 other teachers got arrested at the same time. Someone grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the window while cops were shouting and parents were screaming and kids were crying everywhere. A woman in an FBI jacket led me down the hallway away from all the chaos and into Principal Cowan's office where Dad was already waiting with Augie. Dad pulled both of us close and his arm went around my shoulders while we watched more police cars pull into the parking lot through the office window. Mom got escorted past the door by 2 agents heading to some kind of meeting, and she looked back at us for just a second before they took her away. Principal Cowan came in and told us to stay put until things calmed down, and then she rushed back out to deal with all the parents. We sat there for 3 hours watching cops carry boxes out of classrooms and load them into vans while news trucks started showing up outside. Dad kept checking his phone and squeezing us tighter every time another teacher got walked out in handcuffs. When they finally let us leave, it was almost midnight, and the parking lot was still full of cops and FBI agents taking pictures of everything. The next morning, every TV channel was talking about the drug bust with reporters standing outside our school showing pictures of all the arrested teachers. 43 teachers from 5 different schools were going to federal court, and the news said they found evidence of over 200 kids who bought pills from them. Dad made us breakfast while we watched the news, and nobody said much because what could you even say about something like this? Principal Cowan called an assembly that afternoon, and the gym was packed with kids and parents and counselors from other schools who came to help. She stood at the microphone and told everyone the school failed to protect us, but promised new rules and background checks, and ways for kids to report stuff without giving their names. Kids were crying, and some parents were yelling, and the whole thing felt like a funeral for our school. 3 days later, we met with a therapist that Leah set up for us in this small office downtown with toys and books, even though we were too old for that stuff. Dad told her he was mad about being left out of everything, but understood why Mom had to keep it secret, and we spent an hour talking about trust and secrets and how to fix our family. The therapist gave us homework to do together, like eating dinner without phones and taking walks where we actually talked to each other. That weekend, Augie had Bram over and they played video games in the living room like always, but Bram looked happier than he had in weeks. His mom got a new job with better hours, and nobody was trying to recruit him anymore, and he could just be a kid again playing games with his friend. I sat on the couch watching them argue about which superhero was strongest, and it felt normal for the first time in weeks. Leah came by that evening to update us about the case, and she sat at our kitchen table with coffee that Dad made. She told us Mr. Lowell decided to cooperate with prosecutors and was giving them names of suppliers and people running the whole operation. His testimony was going to help them protect kids in 12 other school districts that were being targeted next. Mom asked how long he would go to prison, and Leah said probably 15 to 20 years with the cooperation deal. The school sent letters home about all the new safety stuff they were doing, including having some company check the chemical supplies and making teachers take ethics classes every year. They put up posters with phone numbers kids could call if teachers offered them pills or acted weird, and Principal Cowan hired 2 new counselors just to help kids deal with what happened. Kids started trusting teachers again, but everyone watched them more carefully, and nobody wanted to be alone with them anymore. I went to see the new chemistry teacher about staying as lab assistant, but when I walked into that room, I felt sick. The smell of chemicals and the sight of those same cabinets where I found the pills made my hands shake and I couldn't breathe right. The new teacher was nice and said she understood completely when I told her I needed to quit, and she promised to find another student who wanted the job. I cleaned out my stuff from the lab one last time and walked out feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Our family started having dinner together every night, and Dad would ask about our day, and Mom would actually answer honestly now. We were closer than before, even though trust was still broken in places, and we all knew it would take time to really heal from everything that happened. Thanks for hanging out and wondering through all of this with me. Definitely felt like a whole journey together. Until we meet again, take care. Subscribe for more content like this.